Hi, and welcome to the Revvity Omics Challenge Accepted podcast. This series explores the latest advances in genetic and genomic testing. Through expert interviews, we get answers to questions that can proactively inform patient care and share knowledge that can empower health. Here's today's expert interview. Welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Madhuri Hegde and Dr. Yiping Lin on how Revvity Omics provides valuable solutions for drug development. In part 1 of our discussion, Dr. Hegde and Dr. Lin described how Revvity Omics differentiates itself from competition in the value it adds to its pharmaceutical partners. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I highly recommend doing so, since Dr. Hegde and Dr. Lin do a wonderful job of explaining how Revvity Omics develops companion diagnostics, known as CDX assays, to provide information that is essential for the safe and effective use of a corresponding therapeutic product. Dr. Hegde and Dr. Lin, thank you again for joining us. So in the first part of the podcast, we talked in a lot of generalities about all the different things, the tremendous number of things that Revvity Omics can offer. Can you help me understand how Revvity Omics' ability to develop a biomedical assay can help a pharmaceutical company in drug development?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really important to understand the specifics of what we mean by developing an assay in different areas. So let's talk about a biochemical assay, right? We have a disorder, which is a metabolic disorder, or a disorder which is enzyme related, presence or absence of an enzyme. And the drug is let's call it enzyme replacement therapy. So what you really want to monitor is after the patient goes on the drug, once you run an assay on, then you can actually detect that enzyme, the activity of that enzyme or not. Right? So we can develop those biochemical assays to measure if the enzyme replacement therapy has had any impact or is efficient or not. But that is not just the piece, that it goes more beyond that, because when a patient is on an enzyme replacement therapy, you do need to monitor them from time to time, because as we all know, we have events. At times we could get sick with something else, and that could impact our ability to process some drug. So assay can be used over a period of time and intervals in predefined intervals. So that's the example of a biochemical assay. A molecular assay is a different type of assay. It's a DNA assay, so it's a more static. Biochemical assays, which are more, quantitative assays, versus DNA assays are qualitative assays. You are essentially looking at a DNA change to determine whichever aspect of that particular disorder you want to look at. So, for example, if there is a gene which is causative of a disorder, and you have a drug for that, you first want, and that disorder has a broad spectrum of clinical presentation, such as neuromuscular disorders.
Yes.
So if you can run a gene panel to identify first the patient, so that's your diagnostic assay, that you're first identifying if the patient who has a particular clinical presentation has a mutation in that particular gene for which a therapy is available. So that's your diagnostic part of the assay. Now, that diagnostic assay can be used post-drug approval, so that the pharma company can find that rare disease patient, reach out to the patient to identify the patient to go on the drug, or the same diagnostic assay can be used in the clinical trial to make sure that the patient entering the clinical trial has a diagnosis of that disorder.
And patient selection is critical. Trials crash all the time if patient selection is not on point.
Absolutely. And then one more aspect of a DNA-based assay is, now we know that 10 years ago, there were a lot of GWAS studies which were done. And people were wondering, this genome-wide association studies, what is the implication of that? Well, after 10, 12 years and heavy investment from NIH in a lot of projects, GWAS projects, now we have identified SNPs which are associated with certain disorders. So, for example, you can identify someone, let's say it's a change of an A to a G, where someone being homozygous for nucleotide A is a better responder than a person who is heterozygous, has an A and a G allele, right? Or a homozygous G could be a non-responder. And
oh my gosh.
right? So
Yeah,
we
so all that GWAS data that has been published and presented in meetings and is overwhelming, you all can analyze and bring it down so that it's useful in drug development.
correct. But
Wow.
not just that, then you go beyond that, right? Because this is now we are talking of asset development. Now, another level up is data analysis. So, looking at sources like different genomes. Remember that genomes from different parts of the world,
Yeah.
you're talking of a Caucasian genome versus an Asian genome. The makeup is slightly different, right? So, you
Yeah.
need to be able to have the ability to grasp data, collect data from of all sources and analyze it. So that's the next layer. And then the layer above that is the ability to create a clinical report from it. And all that is like a funnel in which one layer is layered on the top of the other and doing it within a proper regulatory compliance framework, which is obviously very important.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. I didn't realize, like, it's wonderful to imagine that all of that data is now being able to directly be applied to help patients and that you all can be part of doing that. Dr. Lin, can you help me? So let's say a pharmaceutical company comes to you and they have a potential cure, right? They have a potential treatment, but they're trying to find the patient population. They're trying to fish that specific patient out of a whole spectrum of neuromuscular presentation. How do you help them?
So I think that can start with clinical research capability. So understand the developed drug intended use, and then understand where is the prevalence rate worldwide, and how can we actually go after real world clinical evidence to get those data. Alternatively, there may be some combination of in silico analysis for molecular site. We can often analyze the sequence data to generate some simulation data that can be also useful in that regard.
And so because you're global, you would be able to say if a certain disease is enriched in a certain region of the world, right? And then perhaps direct the pharmaceutical company to that region. I mean, you have all that infrastructure, right?
Yes,
You
that's
bring up a
correct.
great point. Yeah, absolutely. A database, right? We have our clinical labs operate in all the regions, and we have a database of DNA variants, for example, and we can bring it together to look at which change is prevalent in which region.
We touched on this in the last podcast too. So you really can support a pharmaceutical company at every stage in the pipeline, even going to preclinical all the way to post-marketing. So do you have people coming to you at every single stage, or what's the most common time where a pharmaceutical company reaches out to you?
People reach out to us at different stages, and this makes it our jobs a little bit more challenging than we would like them to be, because we have had people reach out to us in different phases of their clinical trials, or even early on when the drug discovery aspect of it is going on, because they really want to know what is the landscape of a diagnostic or a biomarker development assay. To more recently, we know that AAV is commonly used as a vehicle for many of the gene therapy programs. So, developing assays to monitor not just the actual gene, but also the vehicle, that the viral clearance is important, the viral load is important, and those assays are also fall under the same realm of what regulatory agencies are asking pharma companies to develop. So, for example, if AAV is used as a vehicle to develop that particular gene correction tool, then you need to make sure that the AAV virus is also cleared out of the system. So we are developing those kind of assays too. So really it is quite broad. People come to us from different perspectives, different channels, different stages, and different sizes of the projects too.
So I remember from the last podcast, you said you can sometimes keep the drug development from going sideways. And of course, nobody wants their drug development going sideways, but it sounds like no one could come to you too early. That even at the early stage, if it's not exactly the time for you to work with pharma, it's good to check in, and then you can kind of scan the landscape and help them decide when the right time.
Yeah,
for
I
you to
can
work
speak
with them?
about the diagnostic or the assay aspect of it, and Dr. Lin can tell you more about the regulatory framework, because I think those are two different channels people come to us through. And you're right. I mean, as you said, it's good to come in very early. Many of our discussions start a year ahead of time, right?
Mhm.
They're talking to us. There's a lot of back and forth that is happening because they're obviously doing their research, their investigation into what are the different types of assays that could be used. We bring the expertise of actual assay development. And there is a lot of back and forth that is going on. Just from the asset development side, from the regulatory and the compliance side, there is a whole different sort of world there that needs to be dealt with. And I'll pass that on to Dr. Lynn. She can give you a
Yeah.
view on that.
So the beauty of to engage early on is because we can really look at each project's their intended use, application, the size, and where the stage is in order to provide proper partnership and collaboration. So to make the development cycle easier to digest or examine, we can look into 4 different modules, one starting with feasibility, and followed by the design optimization, and then go through analytical verification and clinical validation. Then it's ready to do design transfer and production scalability discussion. So each project coming into our hands, look at those 4 different modules, determine where we are and what is a proper collaboration that we should start with is a good way to go.
That's fabulous. And you can help the pharmaceutical company understand where they are in that process and how you can support them.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like. Okay, so I'm going back to when we were talking about the assays and the development of the assays. You're birthing these assays. These are novel assays. Do they have to be validated? Do you all do all the validation as well?
Yes, validation in a clinical world, that means a clinical trials. And basically is to validate the drug or the assays its intended use in a user's hands, so in the patient's hands. So that clinical trial typically requires certain subjects number, sample size, prevalence rate in order to demonstrate the safety effectiveness of that particular test or particular drug. So we do offer that, and we have a good capability to do so.
Am I right, Dr. Lynn? You did that for COVID, right? The testing.
Yes.
Okay, and so then validating, and so you have the experience of doing that under a high pressure situation, right? The world needed what you were doing it.
That was really a privilege to be part of that during that time.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I remember sending silent prayers up to all of you who were doing that work for us. So thank you. And so the fact that you were able to do that so successfully in such a high pressure situation when the world was depending on you, you bring that experience to whatever any other company needs to have their assay validated, right?
Yes, that's correct.
That's tremendous. So what if the pharmaceutical company needs help with having laboratories for conducting clinical diagnostic testing? Can you do that for them? Can you loan your labs to them?
We operate 3 different models here. The first model is our own labs, which are, as I mentioned, in India, China, Sweden, UK, and US. Our own labs can conduct the testing. So that's number one. If the pharmaceutical company wants to go beyond these countries, then our Revvity commercial arm can go and find, because we already sell kits to labs. So they can go and find these labs to then run those tests. And the third and the probably sort of very unique aspect of what we do is we have a program called Lab in a Lab, and we call it LIL, where someone is interested in bringing in a test, but they do not, they want it on their premises, right? So what we do is that we will go in and we will set up the lab there on their premises. We will hire individuals, we'll put in equipment, we will train the individuals, we'll validate the assay, hand that back over to them, and we will step out.
Like an embassy within a country or something like that, where it's
We have done many, many lils over the last 10 years where, especially in the world of newborn screening, remember as states or sort of set up or approve of a new gene to be tested or a new disorder, state budgets are not ready to kind of take that in. So we really start, this idea originated in the world of newborn screening, where we will go and help the state set up the assay, set up the test, hand it back to them and get out. And then we are there to support them. Now, these are usually kids which we have taken through the FDA approval cycle and things like that. But the LIL program has been very, very successful.
Wow. So you said you had laboratories in which countries? How many countries?
US, UK, Sweden, India, and China.
So I've spoken to people, and one of the questions is it cheaper to do the testing in one country versus another country, or are patients enriched in one country as opposed to another country? You can help troubleshoot that and make that plan because you have labs in all those countries.
You are absolutely right. This aspect of having labs in different countries and having a global footprint, and we call it in country for the country.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very important, because every country has its own cultural makeup of how they approach it, especially in the world of rare disease testing, right?
Oh, yes.
And even in common diseases, I think there is a cultural makeup of that country of whether who can have access to the test, who really wants to get tested. There are so many different facets that needs to be addressed aside from just having a kit and launching it as a clinical test. And being in the country and gaining that experience on the ground there, that is the best way to set up an assay in a country instead of just doing it somewhere and then sending samples across the globe.
Well, and Dr. Lin, from a regulatory perspective, it's also critical because the regulatory, it's so complex. Each country is so different, right? Can you tell me what you all bring from a regulatory perspective?
Yes, so that's a good question and good observation that regulatory landscape just so complicated nowadays. So used to, we would say US FDA, EU IVDD, and Canada, Health of Canada maybe is the third one that we need to worry about. But nowadays, it's just, wow, every country has their regulatory regime and standards. So you really need to have a regulatory intelligence in terms of know all the new development guidance and how this regulatory landscape evolved and be able to stay on top of that and do a strategic planning when there is a regulatory submission. It's not globally deployed in, I would suggest look at return of investment or the patient population, concentrate which country, and be able to go with a regulatory submission path in that particular region or countries to obtain the approval.
So you can advise on that also, like what likelihood of approval, number of patients, return on investment. You add that value as well, it sounds like.
Yes. Those are important decisions to make. And then that's part of regulatory strategy. Even tied with regional or country reimbursement, health reimbursement, or health insurance policies, so be able to navigate better.
So you're also able to provide input and valuable data on reimbursement and on insurance in different countries?
We can guide on how to get that policy and how to work with the local agency or entities to figure that out. Yes.
That's critical, right? I mean, because patients can't, in many cases, if you can't get reimbursement, patient can't have access. Yeah. So then coming back closer to home with FDA submissions, can you talk me through, I understand that the earlier a company comes to you, the more help you can give them. But in general, how do you help a company with FDA submissions?
So I like to take approach, and that's how I work with FDA for such a long time, is treat them as business partner. Instead of that regulatory agency to submit whenever we have, or to go through formal process to ask for information. I'm not saying those not need to be done. Those absolutely is part of process. However, more upfront and more partnership is important. So So I typically would like to better understand the project scope and the drug or device intended use and start to help to coordinate informal meeting with FDA to talk through the regulatory path and the strategy. And basically you engage FDA from the very get-go and engage drug companies from the get-go. So you actually form that strategy and plan together. That usually go a long way.
So from my understanding, those informal meetings with FDA are critical. And so you can be part of that and forging the path. You can be a partner with the FDA and the pharmaceutical company forging this path. So there are fewer surprises, right? And it doesn't go sideways. Yeah. So
or rather know the bad news much early on.
Well, right? Because then you can plan workarounds, right?
Yes.
So that's wonderful. Okay, so help me. So say you get a diagnostic kit and it's approved in the FDA and it's here in the US. And now you want to make it available, or the pharmaceutical company, you all want to make it available globally. How do you do that? How does that process work?
So globally, look at where the test or the drug going to go into, and then evaluate local regulatory requirement. And then we can put a plan together to see how we want to start with that. There are different timelines, sometimes different costs associated with it. So make sure our product design upfront meeting global requirements, because oftentimes user requirements dictate the product design. So I think global regulatory strategy need to be also started very early on. So we understand which country this product going to go into. And then so we can plan that regulatory submission strategy and plan much early on.
So this goes back to what we were saying before, that if having a pharmaceutical company come to you earlier is better, because I think I heard you say from the beginning, you want to know that if you're going to take the product global, you want to design it for that purpose so that you don't then later on have to go back and fix a whole bunch of things. And you can help do that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
From the beginning.
Sometimes either we can meet that local country's regulatory requirements, or sometimes the product feature, the design of the feature doesn't really meet the intended use in that particular country or region. So there will be a lot of redundant work need to be, or retrospectively to do.
That makes so much sense. So this is fascinating. I think I understand much better some of the specific things and the specific ways that you can help companies and pharmaceutical companies. Is there anything else I should have asked you, or that you would like to say that you think would help our listeners understand?
I think I would just add that this is a very programmatic approach. And it's really important to remember, and as you said, Lara, already, that the earlier we start, the better it is, because there's a lot of different arms of Revvity and Revvity Omics involved in this entire process. We have the expertise and we want to obviously give the best possible product, which can be used globally, right? And that is the key here. Dr. Lin already talked about the country-specific registration requirements. And even before you can talk about commercialization, you need to make sure that the test can be accessible in that particular country. So there's a lot that goes into it. And the thing I would like to leave everyone with is that these are programmatic approaches, require deep expertise, and we really bring that to the table. And we work with the partners to make sure that the outcome is what both parties really intend to have.
I will be thinking about the implications of your work for a while. One takeaway I have right now, though, is that Revvity Omics can provide value through the entire drug development lifecycle. That's quite impressive and must be causing pharmaceutical companies to sit up and take note. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Revvity Omics Challenge Accepted podcast. For further topics we explore, please visit our website, revvity.com. Until next time, goodbye.